So hi everyone, I would like to introduce Theresa Shearer, who's Group CEO of Enable Scotland and the Piper Group. And Theresa will explain a bit more about what these organisations are. So partnerships and mergers are always a hot topic, and as we all know, increasingly funders are looking for evidence of partnership working within the sector. And this session is going to focus on how it all feels rather than the practical elements of mergers and partnerships. And feelings can run high. You know, it can feel amazing if things go well, and it feels really, you know, it can be cruel and despondent when it doesn't. The partnership between Enable Scotland and Sense Scotland, what topic? Wow, now we've got music. That's okay. So it was very much, as they say in Scotland, the talk of the steamy in the Scottish surf sector for quite some time. And when I was thinking about who would be able to deliver this workshop, Theresa was actually suggested by a number of people. So thank you so much, Theresa, for being with us today.
Fiona, could I ask you just to fill for 2 minutes till we resolve what the issue is? I am so sorry, but we seem to have some music coming out for some reason. Okay. And if you could fill for 2 minutes, I promise we will resolve this and come right back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, but music's okay. As long as we can hear you. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to fill for a couple of minutes for, but let's go with it anyway. Miriam, it's lovely to see you. You're the only face I think that I can see. Oh no, I can see lots if I do another thing with my screen. Oh, lots of friendly faces. So yeah, that's nice. So what can I tell you? I can tell you about, so my experience of mergers and partnerships was in my last job as Chief Executive of Visibility. We merged with Dumfries and Galloway Association for the Blind. And we also had an approach from another organisation who wanted to become part of us, and one worked well and one didn't work at all. So it was quite, in terms of the stress factor of it all, it was really, really challenging. And my advice to anybody considering doing anything like that is do your due diligence, because that certainly reduces the stress element. The organisation that I mentioned that we chose not to go into a partnership with, and the reason for that was when I did the due diligence, we found an enormous pension deficit, which had...
Can you start the video, Lindsay?
Yeah, and here we go. So I'll start waffling on now about things that happened years ago. But obviously the stress of both things, whether it's successful or not, it is quite a challenge. And doing all the legal stuff, handling the media coverage, all of it can be quite difficult. So I don't know if Theresa, if you're ready to go yet.
Yes, I'm ready. I just don't know if you can see me, if that's...
No, we can't see you, but we can hear you.
Happy to talk? Yeah, okay, no problem, that's fine.
So if you, we've just got your name on the screen.
Okay, lovely.
So I'm going to mute now, Theresa, and just hand over to you. And if at some point you can put your camera on, because it's certainly,
yes, so
you know, it's just nicer to be able to see someone.
Of course, and Lindsay from my team, who should be on the call, could you try and take my camera off whatever it's on, which is stopping me showing, and I'll just talk until you're able to do that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, perfect. So it's the camera needs to go on, Lindsay, and it's not. Yeah, so I'm going to leave you to try and work that out technically. I'll just speak for a couple of minutes if that's okay, and I'll firstly start with a huge apology. We are 8 months into COVID, and I do sessions like this day in and day out at the moment, and we've never had this technical hitch, so my absolute profuse apologies. Yes, it's tier 4 in Scotland today. The weather is great and the tech isn't working, but I'm going to try and make the best of the situation that I possibly can. So I will speak for a few minutes. I'll give you some of the background to Enable and to the Piper Group to begin with, and hopefully by that point we'll have the camera back on and everything should be fabulous. If for some reason it's not, then I will happily send out all of the wonderful slides that I prepared for you, because I'm really hopeful that you get to see them. So I'll start as if I was talking through the slides, and please, if I speak too quickly or if you find it too difficult because slides aren't up on the screen, you can't see me, please let me know and I'll certainly slow down and we will try and work out the technical difficulty. So I'm Theresa Shearer, Chief Executive of Enable Scotland, as we've talked about. That's me in a picture, looking a little bit like Hillary Clinton, according to my sister, which is never a very flattering comparison, I'm not sure. However, so we work at Enable Scotland and the Piper Group for an equal society for people with learning disabilities. That's our core purpose, but we do that in 3 different ways. We work predominantly with people with learning disabilities in our charitable section, which looks at very traditional charity model, fundraising and grants, foundations, delivering projects all across Scotland, across 32 local authorities. The second thing we do in terms of our purpose in equal society is we provide social care services. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about social care services and how they pertain to mergers and partnerships and how that feels. And the third thing we do, which is very important to our purpose, is that we work with young people. People of all ages, but predominantly young people in particular, in terms of employability and training. So people with disabilities, with long-term health conditions, with sight impairment, with various other conditions that might make getting into work and sustaining work much more difficult. So in a nutshell, we have our traditional charity, and beyond our traditional charity, what we have is a social care delivery arm, and we also have an employability and a training arm. And over the past number of years, I've been CEO now for 5 years, we've experienced what many charities up and down the country have experienced, which is difficult times. So we understand the impact of austerity, we understand how difficult the sector is and can be to work in, but we also understand now more than ever the hashtag of never more needed could not be closer to our hearts. And so therefore, over the past 4 or 5 years, we've looked at how do we continue with our charitable purpose, but perhaps look to do it differently. How can we work with mergers and partnerships, and how would that feel? So thank you, Fiona, for inviting me to come here today, and I really wish we were all together in a hotel someplace in England discussing this over coffee face to face, which is much nicer, but I'll try my best to recreate some of that feeling, and I've brought my own Starbucks with me just to kind of create the conference feeling. So if we can move on to the first slide. I'll say a little bit about each slide as I go into them. And the first slide is an academic slide. It's a theory of change in terms of emotions and how the emotions of change feel. Now, I put that up there, so please don't worry to say this is not going to be my presentation today. Today, I'm not going to talk about the academic theory of mergers and partnership, but actually what I'm hoping to talk about is much more that emotional cycle of change. How does it feel when you're involved in change to the extent that we've been involved in over the past couple of years at Enable Scotland and the Piper Group? So if we can go to the next slide, I'll start with the beginning of our journey into mergers and partnerships and where we felt the first real emotion came from for us. So if we can go to the curiosity slide. And I think what you will see from the next slide is a really quite a busy slide, so apologies for that. But I think what we're trying to show here is we understood that we had to change how our charity operated in order to be sustainable for the long term. Enable Scotland is 65 years old, and it is one of the most incredible and purpose-driven charities in our country. its history, of its membership base, of its grassroots, of really coming from parents who had children with learning disabilities, and actually that history and that legacy of always fighting for a human rights-based approach for people with disabilities. And it is equally true of sight loss and vision impairment. And I know that your history, many of your histories and legacies will be similar. But we were very curious about, as we entered into sort of 2020 and beyond, what does a modern, vibrant charity look like? And so that first emotion, I think, is very important, curiosity. And as a team, we were very curious to think about what's happening across the rest of the UK and beyond, but predominantly in the UK. We were struck that, particularly in Scotland, we weren't seeing lots of changes in terms of mergers and partnerships, but we knew that more broadly across the UK there had been some activity. So we were very curious to find out what that activity looked like. So we did some initial work with PwC, and what that gave us was a real insight into some of our curiosity, and helped really funnel our curiosity into much more, I think, tailored strategic thinking, and actually made us think around, there are thousands of possibilities. There are limitless numbers of charities all over the UK that we talk about collaboration, we could do things with, we see potential in lots of different areas. But as an exec team, we wanted to be very clear about putting something to our board that was both practical, pragmatic, but also very much driven by our purpose. So the 3 Ps: practical, pragmatic, and driven by purpose. And so that curiosity led us into looking at all 5 of these options. And today what I'm going to talk about is how it feels when you try some of these options. And I think there are 2 options that we can talk about from my personal experience that I'm happy to share with you today. So if we think about option number 5 in particular, that group structure, that's one of the issues that we can talk about today. And then the other thing that we can talk about is something in between option 3 and option 4, which really transpired over the course of our strategic development and some of the conversations we were having with both other charities and other for-profit organisations. And I think that's important, that our experience of mergers and partnerships has been twofold. It has been with other charities, but we also have some quite extensive experience of that type of work with the for-profit sector, and I'll come on a little bit more about that as we go through the slides. So having satisfied our curiosity, that emotion about what are the options out there, what are the possibilities, we then had to really think about how do those options look like, or what do they look like in terms of Enable Scotland, and particularly in a Scottish context. But I would argue this is equally applicable to a UK context. And I've done some work over the past 12 months in particular with a number of think tanks based in London around the type of experience that we've had in Scotland, and looking at the lessons learned from a UK and a more global base. So I do hope that what I'm talking about today makes sense from as wide a geography as possible, albeit my examples are based here in Scotland. So after curiosity, what happens next? And I had a great conversation with Fiona when we first started talking about this session, and in my head I sort of jotted out, what are the lessons that I can talk about that I've learned personally? And so if we look at excitement, I think that is an emotion that we can talk to and attest to, not just as a chief executive, but across the whole executive team. So if we move on to the excitement slide, one of the things as we started to hone our thinking and do some of our modelling of what mergers, partnerships and group structures might look like, as a team, we became very excited at the possibilities that were out there. And what I think excited us was, as we began to look more fundamentally into how this might work, actually as we started to take some opinions and some views from other people who'd worked in the sector, we started to grow in confidence and our excitement levels around, 1, sustaining our charity, 2, delivering our charitable purpose, but 3, doing it in a way that would also provide better services, better projects, better employability and training opportunities, in essence, better impact to our frontline, both in terms of those people we work for and also in terms of our colleagues who work at the front line. So that level of excitement grew. And I think across 2018-19 in particular, when we started to go into a conversation with one of our potential partners, we looked at two of the slides here. So if you're looking at this slide just now, what it's essentially showing is a continuum of how you might merge or go into strategic partnership. And there are two parts for us that were very, very exciting. One was around the group structure. And if I'm being honest, that was absolutely our preferred model. We felt, we can talk about the emotions as we went through that. So we felt as we worked with one of our partner charities here in Scotland, we were both working in the field of learning disability. We were both working with adults and children. We were both working to support a more equal society. And actually that idea of forming the Piper group with SEND Scotland and forming a group structure within which to operate actually was an exciting option. And I think it's important to say at this point, it was an exciting option, not just for the Enable Scotland exec team, but also for the SEND Scotland exec team. So we were quite, I think, emboldened by some of the work we did, both with MPC and with PwC. But in the meantime, as Enable Scotland, we were starting to see in the marketplace much more work around service assets, swaps, transfers. Now, what do I mean by that? And again, I think this is where MPC were really helpful in our thinking. Over a period of time, we were actually working in acquiring new work via a service transfer model without necessarily bringing in the brand of the organisation that we were working with. And I'm going to come on to some examples of that. Now, we were not doing that aggressively, or we were not in any way trying to take over the marketplace in Scotland, but what we found was there was quite a bit of failing provision, as we've seen across the whole of the UK, particularly over the past couple of years, as some of the impacts of austerity have hit, and as some charities who potentially have had less in the way of reserve to cushion them from the difficult blows. So good organisations that were doing good work, but were struggling to work in a financially sustainable way. And so whilst we were focused on group structures, we were also working quite organically with service and asset swaps and transfers of other pieces of work. So I'm going to come on to a little bit more about that, but just so you can see how that worked, and hopefully this next slide, Lindsay, will give you a bit of a kind of understanding of how that worked. So we set up the Piper group. And we set up the Piper group initially to work with our friends at SEND Scotland and to pull together a group structure across both Enable and SENS. Now, we worked in this programme for about a year. It took us about a year to get to board approval, and then about another year for full programme implementation. At some point into that post-implementation period, so about 5 months in, SEND Scotland decided that the group structure was not for them. Now, I'm really here to talk about Enable Scotland and our perspective of this, and not necessarily about our partners at SENS, but they did make what I think must have been an incredibly difficult position 5 months in to reverse out of the group structure. So, and I think that was a very difficult decision for them, because they had previously been in a group structure with SENS UK and they had moved out of that. They came into a group structure with Enable Scotland and moved out of that. And whilst that was very difficult for us, and I could talk about some of the emotions of our exec team and our board of trustees, and personally as a chief exec of how that felt at the time. One of the things that we were very clear about is this strategy that we had been pursuing of supporting the Enable charity, supporting the care services, and supporting the employability and training services was actually working very well for us. So a group structure in the sense of a more commercially focused back office that was somewhat removed from the branding at the front actually had many benefits for us, and I'll talk about some of those as we move on. So in terms of emotions, I go as far as to say, I think I used the word devastating at the time, and it did feel pretty devastating when we went into a group structure with one partner and that partner removed itself from that group structure. But as I say, we'd done about a year's work in diligence. We had worked with EY on digital transformation. We worked with some brilliant funders on our digital upgrade as an organisation, and all of that pulled together and continued to work for Enable Scotland. So whilst we felt devastated at the decision of our partners, we absolutely respected it was their decision to make. But there certainly was a feeling of, disappointment, I think, at that point. However, like all good executive teams, when something goes wrong, and it goes wrong for all of us in many occasions as charity chief execs, we pushed forward, we assessed our strategy, we looked at what was working and what wasn't working, and we continued on with this idea about creating a very efficient, effective back office that could support the 3 brands within the Enable Scotland group. And to date, that's been fairly successful for us. So if I move on and talk about excitement again, that's had a huge impact on our growth and a sense of confidence. We're talking about feelings. What we've seen is over the period, and what you have in front of you now is a slide which shows the 5-year journey of some of these options that we looked at, either group structure and when we looked at service transfers from other organisations. What you will see from the slide is a steady growth of impact. It's not about the numbers of millions for us, it's about the number of people that we are working for and supporting, and it's about the number of people who are working for us, who we are providing fair work to in a well-organised, highly unionised, positive employee relations environment, paying the Scottish living wage, and to 25% of our workforce significantly above the Scottish living wage. What we've been able to show is our growth in impact has come about from having essentially this brave strategy of, we need to do things differently, we need to consider what different looks like, and we need to not be scared of the feelings that we have of potentially not having the same level of control had we stayed at a £30 million organisation as we finished 2016 in, but actually going forward 5 years, doubling in size. And I want to be really clear here, when we started this strategic journey around mergers, partnerships and acquisitions, it was not about growth of income. It was absolutely about charitable purpose. But when we focused on our charitable purpose and we looked at new models of delivery, that newfound confidence the charity found actually really contributed to the growth of our impact and in line with that, the growth of our income from 30 at the end of 2016 to 60 for the year that we're just about to go into. So what does that say about what we did and how did we basically, I suppose in some ways it was like riding 2 horses at the same time. It was having 2 strategic options, option A and option B, both of which were credible. And that felt a little bit conflicted. It felt a little bit complex. But what it also felt like was we were able to do, I think we'll talk about in the slides, demonstrate by doing. We were able to test different models of working without putting the charity or the people we work for or our frontline staff at risk in any way. So we call that demonstrating by doing. And it's a phrase you'll hear up and down the country and in all of our front lines and in all of our offices and towns and cities where we work. This idea that we have looked at mergers, partners and acquisitions, and what we have done or attempted to do is demonstrate what the possibilities are by doing. So moving out of the theory, moving into the demonstration, and actually learning along the way of what works and what doesn't work. So if I go back to the next slide, go forward to the next slide, sorry, thanks Lindsay. You can see that we were left with 3 key options as we move through that strategy cycle of those 5 years. the group structure with a partner, service asset transfer, or do nothing. Because for many charities, and it may well be that that is a legitimate choice for your charity, that actually doing nothing is the best way to keep your charity safe. So if you are working well in wherever you're working, if you're working well in the sector or the themes or the programs that you're working in, if your impact is high and good, if your financial sustainability is good, if your long-term financial resilience is good, if your purpose is being met, you may choose to do nothing. But I personally, from the charities that I deal with up and down the country, my work in some UK-based think tanks, I'm not sure that many charities fall into that category. And we knew across the plethora of options that the two that made best sense for us was a group structure with a partner and the service transfer model that we were working with quite organically. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes and go into, as Fiona said, more deeply, the feelings of both those options. So the group structure and what that's like, and then the service asset and transfer. So if we could think about going to the next slide, please, Lindsay. The group structure, how did that feel? And I was a little bit reticent, if I'm honest, about talking about this publicly when Fiona first asked me, because in many ways we set up the Piper Group to work with our partners at SEN Scotland, and very soon into that partnership they made a decision to reverse back from that decision. However, it came after a year of programme planning. And before the year of programme planning, there was a year of proof of concept, due diligence, a whole host of work. So when we set up the Piper Group, how did it feel? It felt very professional. It felt very considered. It felt very measured. And it actually felt quite visionary. And it felt as if what we were trying to achieve was to upgrade all of our digital capability, to upgrade our back office infrastructure, to really make that more efficient and effective, so that for both partners, more of the income that came into the charities could be funneled into the front line to serve our charitable purpose. So on a sort of MBA type tick list, we would have ticked many boxes, and it felt as if, although it was a difficult decision, it felt like the right decision to make at the time. And I would still argue, for us was the right decision. There is no doubt that their decision to come out of the partnership made a difference to how that worked and to the pace of the savings we made. But I will come on to some of the big strategic objectives that the programme planning and the bringing together of some professional expertise to help our charities helped us in the medium term in terms of our results. So how it felt was we were doing the right things. It was quite visionary. It was, as I say, the well-considered feeling, I think, is probably the best way that I can sum up that decision. Now, I think what I'm talking about here is how the executive teams felt. And I think if we look at trustee level, it is likely that that felt slightly differently. And I think that's fair enough. I think, particularly in terms of those working in the back offices that we were bringing together, it probably felt slightly different. And I think we have to acknowledge that I think in that level of change, the feeling is different dependent on the perspective and the prism that you are operating in and looking through. If I move over to the area where I think we have made the most strides as a charity and where we've had the biggest change to our impact, which would be around the service transfer model in terms of strategic partnerships, mergers and acquisitions, then I think that felt entirely different. So if I can move on to the service asset slide, Lindsay, in terms of those feelings. Scary, stark, and an immediacy and a pace to that work, which I think to this day still remains, although we have got much better much slicker at dealing with it. And if I can give an example of this, we talk about if we talk about the income as a kind of indicator of how we have worked in service asset transfer, we have started off in a position of £30 million worth of income, and we will end next year on 60 million. And where has that come from? It has primarily come from feeling service provision around us in our core work around services, social care services, and employability and training. And primarily what's happened is both charities and for-profit organisations have, for a variety of different reasons, failed in the delivery for those citizens that they are working for. Now, our job at Enable Scotland and the Enable Group is not to pass judgment on why that's happened, but actually we have become, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a safe harbour. So when things have gone wrong, or when organisations are looking to either move out of certain types of work, or to move out of certain geographies, or are simply struggling to remain financially viable, we have worked on a service transfer model around partnerships and acquisitions. So I will give you probably, I think, the scariest example of that, and I think it's it maybe points to the fact that service acquisition, service delivery transfer models are perhaps, in my view, much more difficult than the group structure, despite the fact I think we're much more successful at this model here. We recently undertook a piece of work where there had been an organisation that was failing to support 50 citizens across one geography. And those 50 citizens for approximately 2 years, and this is a matter of public record, I'll try not to name individual names, but matter of public record, those 50 citizens had been supported by about 100 strong workforce for one organisation. And for 2 years, their regulatory grades had been sitting at 2s and were about to go to 1s. So CQC and care inspector are not hugely different. There are tolerance levels for when things go wrong, but there becomes an intolerance when people's human rights are being abused and when individuals are not getting the choice and control to live the lives that they should live as active citizens. And in this one particular experience of service transfer, it felt hugely scary. So what we were talking about was £6 million contract, 50 individuals with very complex requirements, brilliant people with great talents and assets, none of which were being utilised in the way that they might have done. A workforce of 100 people who perhaps wouldn't have come through a recruitment process for a variety of different reasons. And all of the things that can go wrong when charities are also service deliverers had gone wrong for 2 years. So you're not bringing into the group structure the brand, and you're not bringing into the group structure the back office infrastructure. You're bringing into your group at this point a piece of work that is not working very well. But on the other hand, what you're bringing into the group structure are brilliant people, citizens, people that deserve a right to have a good life. And actually you're hoping that by working in the way that you work, you can help some of that. But it feels quite scary. And at the point that we were involved in that particular piece of work, what we did was we went to the regulator and we said, this is a massive piece of work. It is incredibly scary because the levels of regulatory compliance, the levels of standard operating processes, the levels of gaps in what should be delivered versus what is actually being delivered are huge. And actually we have this charity over here which is working very well, is the highest performing charity at national level in terms of regulatory scores. And we know everything doesn't go by regulatory scores, but you know, it's a really high performing charity here. And you're asking us to merge effectively with the smaller local organisation that has been failing for 2 years. And if that goes wrong, then it's our reputation, not theirs. So the service transfer model of mergers and partnerships and acquisitions is actually a lot scarier. And it's also a lot less considered in terms of the diligence You know, it's a straight chippy transfer, and you land this new workforce in your team over the course of a couple of weeks in a way that in a group structure we didn't do. It was a much more considered transfer, working with the trade unions and doing everything legislatively well, but also in the spirit of the legislation well. So I think from my perspective, those are the two key areas that we have grown our impact and really helped our purpose as an organisation. We started off with a very clear vision of what a group structure would look like with a single partner. But actually, over the period of the past 3 years, what we have done is significant levels of organisations coming into our group, but without the brand and without the back office. And actually, that feels very scary, but it still feels very purpose driven, because what we're able to do is to work where there have been failures and turn it into something very positive. There's been lots of brilliant independent reviews of this work we've done by some of our leading universities here, which, you know, if people are particularly interested, I'm happy to share that work. But suffice to say, for the purposes of this conference, that way of working has worked. The immediacy, the pace, the scariness is there, but actually the impact on people's lives and bringing your purpose and your values is just outstanding. And as I say, I would say that I'm the chief exec, I'm biased, but lots of independent reviews would attest to that. So as we complete just the few words that I want to say today, again, thank you for being with me despite our problems at the start. I just wanted to say a couple of words on emotions as barriers, and I think that's really important. So I talked a little bit about trustees, and I've been asked to do a couple of conferences specifically on the role of trustees in both of these options, group structure with a partner and service transfer. And I think one of the things that I've certainly learned along the past 3 years of this journey is there is a need to relinquish sovereignty. I think that's for the chief exec as well as for the trustees, but particularly for trustees. There is a need for alignment. You should not do these things because the business case, you know, I talked about that MBA checklist, that there has to be an emotion and a feeling that is led by your purpose. But even when that is there, I think it still can be quite a difficult river to navigate on, and there are some wild rapids at times, and other times it's quite plain sailing and it can work very well. We have lots of good examples of that. I think that we have to look out for founder syndrome. So when trustees and chairs and people who've been involved in the organisation for many decades are asked to think about these new ways of working, I from an outside perspective could look in and see, oh, you know, I've never founded a charity. I've worked and consulted with numerous charities, but I've never founded a charity. And how would I feel if this was happening to or with a charity that I founded? And I think we just have to be respectful of that as a potential emotional barrier. I think for executive teams, there is the fear of getting it wrong, the idea of self-preservation. Will it affect my job? The best thing that happened, I think, in my view, to our initial group structure with Sen Scotland was the coming together of the chief executives of Sen Scotland and myself to say, there might not be 2 chief executive jobs here. In fact, there's hardly likely to be 2 chief executive jobs. There can't be, for obvious reasons. So we both went into this knowing that we may not come out the other side as the chief executives, but we're both very, very committed to doing the right thing for the front line and the right thing for our charities. But absolutely, you have to overcome that emotional fear as a chief executive, as executive teams do. And then this idea of the badge of failure, there's a brilliant metric that's used by Eastside Primetimers who look at the Good Merger Index every year, and what they talk about is 1,500 new charities are born every year, but in the last year that they looked at the data, only 58 charities merged. So I'll just leave that with you. 1,500 born every year, but only 58 ever merge or come together. And from their analysis, the mergers tend to come from much smaller charities by income size. And they also tend to be where there is a financial necessity. For all of us, I think an emotional reluctance or inertia, we're so busy doing our jobs. We do not ever sit as chief executives of charities irrespective of size or scale, and not have anything to do. You know, I know more than anyone, as everyone on this call does, how difficult life is being a charity chief executive, how rewarding, and all of that goes without saying. But the difficulties of the job and the things that you're juggling constantly. So sometimes there might well be a kind of emotional reluctance or barrier. And for those people that are thinking about it, there's a brilliant piece of work, The Third Sector and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And it's written by a guy whose name you might recognise, Andy Haldane from the Bank of England, also involved with pro bono economics, as some of you might know, who has been looking at this from a third sector perspective, and why are there barriers to more of this work not happening. So I won't give you a view on that piece of work, other than to say I absolutely love it. I try and stay neutral on it, but I do absolutely love it. Have a look at it, have a read it, and I think it's really interesting if you are thinking about emotions as barriers. So finally, I'll go back to something that I said at maybe about halfway through the presentation, which is demonstrate by doing. I'm not sure if Michelle Obama quotes seem cheesy now, but anyway, I really like them, and I'll go back to it. You can't make decisions based on fear and the possibility of what might happen. We talked about emotional barriers and how it felt when you were embarking on this kind of journey, be it group structure, straightforward merger, or service transfer, but actually being open to the fact that there could be better and different ways to do things, and doing it not out of financial necessity, but before that financial necessity hits, I actually think is the stronger and the braver of the directions to take. So some strategic outcomes for us as an organisation. Where have we ended up sort of 5 years into this journey, having worked with 2 different models? Service growth of 75%, overall group income has grown by 60%, sustained surpluses, we've doubled the reserves position. That is more or less the MBA checklist, and we can put that to the side. The important thing for me as chief exec, and all of that is important, don't get me wrong, but it's not enough in and of itself. The important thing, people that we work with have better quality lives. And if you think back to those people I talked about where there were clear cases of human rights abuse, actually those people are now living independent, self-directed lives, being supported by teams of people that they have recruited to work alongside them to their own personal outcomes. It's one of the social care success stories, I think probably of the year, notwithstanding where we are with COVID. Quality of support has surpassed that which is considered the norm in the sector. We have 84% of the work we do is looked at by our regulators 5s and 6s, so very good or excellent, versus 52 by the sector. And I think most importantly to our purpose, what we're demonstrating by mergers, acquisitions and strategic partnerships is we are doing more of what our purpose says. We are delivering an equal society. So I hope that was helpful. I do hope the sound and the video quality is working now. But yes, happy now to go back to Fiona and take any questions.
Thanks, Theresa. That was really interesting. A lot of what you said, I'm sure, resonates with lots of different people in the room. I particularly your part around the emotions of effectively talking yourself out of a job. That, you know, that is a real challenge, isn't it? And you have to put yourself second to the greater good. And of course, your quote from the fantastic Michelle Obama about making decisions based on fear. Not always easy to do when you're frightened.
Absolutely.
Easier said than done. So how do you want to do this then, Theresa? So we can everyone raise their hands if if anyone wants to ask a question, we can use that, the hand thing. Could somebody just do that so as I can see if it works? Right, Philippa. Okay, I can see Philippa there with an actual hand as opposed to a virtual hand. So can you unmute yourself, Philippa?
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay, right, go for it.
I thought it was fantastic, Theresa. Thank you so much. I thought your presentation was brilliant. Can I ask what geography you cover? What area of mileage? So, you know, how wide is your services now?
Yeah.
And can I ask how wide was it before, and have you really grown in
Yeah.
geography?
Yes. So we, if you think about our charitable projects and our care delivery services and our employability, Philippa, we cover the whole of Scotland, so all 32 local authorities. So we work in the island authorities, so in places like Orkney and Stornoway, which are notoriously, I don't want to say difficult to work with, but are much more challenging. We work across the Central Belt in the urban areas, and then we also work in places like Dumfries and Galloway, Aberdeenshire. Our thing that we always talk about is we work on a tiny, very lightly populated island where you have to get 2 ferries to get to, and we still manage to give that level of support and quality. And the answer to your question is yes, the number of local authorities in terms of social care has increased since we've started this strategic direction and this strategic journey.
Thanks, Theresa. Yeah. Which island then with the 2 ferries?
So it's the one just off Oban. I'm going to say it's not Tyree. It's the little one with
right.
famous for the seas. I think the seals. You know what I'm talking about?
It's not Eriskay. Anyway.
No. It's literally as if you were getting the ferry to Oban and then getting off to the wee tiny one.
Yes. I think from my personal experience of Theresa's organisation, it's large, and the geography of Scotland is difficult and challenging to cover because it's so diverse. I have very busy areas and densely populated, and then, as Theresa has described, very, very remote areas.
Rural, yeah.
Anyone else? Philippa Simkus.
Thanks, Fiona. Thank you, Theresa. That was really inspiring.
Yeah,
I've been involved in this kind of scenario. It's got to the 11th hour, and then trustees have pulled back from it. So I wonder if you have any tips for us on supporting trustees to go through that change.
Yeah. So it sounds really obvious now that you've said that, but my advice would be, if we were going back into a group structure with another specific partner, we put so much effort into the executive teams, so much effort into the project teams, so much effort into the comms around parents and families. Because the trustees had signed up to what had been a year-long diligence programme, I guess naively, and I would say this now, honestly, some time has passed, it's been a year since it happened, our assumption was both sets of trustees were absolutely solid. And one set were, and the other set clearly weren't. And again, it's a matter of public record that for the other party, what started off as a decision being approved by 11 trustees, the decision to reverse the trustee board had got much smaller, and it was, I think, 5 or 6 that made the decision to pull out. So I think put as much effort and capital, emotional, go back to Fiona's point, and professional capital into trustees would be equally important. And I think my other reflection would be on, because that was almost our second walk down the aisle, we've also kind of got engaged to somebody before, so early stage talks with 2 sets of trustees, and again a set of trustees that perhaps just hadn't done all of the strategic planning work we'd done and what were the possibilities. So I think, I'm biased, I think our trustees were open to all the different routes, because for 2 or 3 years we talked in strategic planning sessions about the different routes, and we'd worked with some professionals on what's worked and what's not worked in the past. So my advice, Philippa, if I was ever doing, my advice to myself, let alone to you, would be, if you were doing it again, put some of that capital, emotional and financial professional capital, into the trustee boards, and don't assume because the decision was yes at the point in time it was yes, it's a done deal.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Alison?
Thank you. Hi, Theresa. Alison.
Hi.
Pocklington Trust. Also really enjoyed listening to you. Sort of a follow-on point from Philippa's, really, you talked about the investment in capital, and in your presentation you talked quite a lot about the professional support and advice that you had, which kind of came through quite a lot. You clearly used that. How did you go about engaging that? Because I think one of the things that holds some people back is obviously cost, and change is expensive, or can be, but getting that professional support and input can be really critical. to success? You know, maybe a personal question, but did you manage to get any of that for free, or did you just have to commit?
Yeah, so a mixture of both. So 3 things: some pro bono, some at reduced cost, and some funded. So I'll sort of go through the 3 parts if we've got a couple of minutes to do that. In the first, when you look back at the PwC piece, actually what we did there was we got 3 charities together who we kind of all knew each other pretty well, and the 3 chief execs committed to something like £5,000, £6,000 each. So I'm not saying that's not a lot of money, but on the grand scheme of things, we put a pot together and we did some of that original proof of concept work with PwC. And we also got them to do a little bit of pro bono for us. So we said, okay, we will commission this piece of work, but we're looking for you to do some of your CSR and do it pro bono. So that was fine. The second piece was around the bringing together of 2 charities, and the legal and the governance and the VAT and all of the kind of, you know, the issues around that. And we recognised that we needed some professional help for that, but we also recognised that we needed professional help for the digital transformation. So we went to one of our funders, the Robertson Trust, who, if you Google them, they are a Scottish-based fund. I don't think, Fiona, they do work across the rest of the UK, but they are superb. I mean, they are just one of the best funders, I think, out there. And we said that we want to do this piece of work around group structure, but we want to base it on digital transformation. So we always had it, even if the group structure is not perfect, what we've done is we've really built digital capability across the entire organisation. They gave us a substantial amount of money. And again, that's a matter of public record, because they really liked the fact that we were trying to do something different. So they were aware of the piece that I referred to, the Andy Haldane piece, and they were aware of all of the issues around the sector, and they were just outstanding. We took that funding, we went to EY and we said, we've got a pot of fund to do digital transformation and we think you're the people to help us with it. But our quid pro quo is we want some pro bono work on the legal, the governance, that, you know, the other things that are surrounding it. And that worked very well. And I guess what they got from that was a lot of excellent PR in terms of we're very, you know, vocal on social media as a charity. You can Google us and you can see that. But what we really did was we worked with those people that gave us some pro bono support to make sure that they got some kudos and some really positive PR out of it. So some we paid for ourselves, but very little. Some we did pro bono, and a substantial piece we had funded.
Thanks, Theresa. We maybe have time for one more question.
Okay.
And if I'm sorry if I'm missing it. Oh, Stuart. Last word goes to Stuart Clayton.
No pressure then. I just wanted to say it was just an inspiring presentation based, you know, your whole theme of the presentation was based on the best value for donors as well as the best outcomes for people. Yeah. And we often get entrenched in history, ownership, badges, branding, etc., yeah. To the detriment of the people that we profess to support. So for me, it was amazing. And so I just wanted to say thank you. It sparked a lot of thought. And certainly from a sight loss perspective, it's very interesting to see if other organisations are looking to go down a similar line and a creative line, perhaps even outside of sight loss, to embed sight loss in other provision. So no real question, just a big thank you. Thanks, Theresa.
You're welcome, thank you. And if the work has done anything, the thing that I'm probably most proud of, apart from the beneficiary impact, is the discussion it sparked. So just pre-COVID, there were 2 other organisations, not in our part of the world, in our part of the sector, who had come along to us to say, can we take some of this learning? Because we're quietly having conversations, one in children's charities and one in the hospice sector. We're quietly having conversations and we're interested in what you've done and how we might apply that. So we're very open about the learning. As I say, there's a brilliant piece of research that's due out in 2 weeks' time from Strathclyde University Business School, which will look at this from a funder's perspective, and I think we will be very happy to make that public to people. But if anyone is interested, we have significant amounts of documentation, program plans, strategic map, you know, all of the things that you can think of that show the journey of the year from making the decision to getting to the position we got to, and we'd be happy to share that, of course.
Theresa, thank you so much, and thank you for your generosity and your very humbling honesty about how challenging this whole process was. I think this is maybe something, given the reactions in the room, that we'll follow up on a bit more in Visionary. Maybe
Excellent.
Find a structured way of making these resources available to people. We might even take advantage of your astoundingly good nature and invite you back again.
Happy to do so, Fiona.
To do something for our membership, maybe a bit longer. So that's us until this afternoon.